quarter to 12. And Chris, you are see if I can make you a co-host. Awesome.
See if I can.
Okay,
some
Chris,
stuff.
looks like you've got the power to make everything happen. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and troubleshoot things with our president. Are we good,
Sure.
folks?
I think we're good.
Awesome.
Good.
I'm going to go on mute now.
So, Sean, if I could give you a little bit of lead in, we were talking about who would be cool to get to come and talk to us about sharks. I thought to myself that the area anywhere north of Monterey is a little bit of a unknown for me. I understand that it's silty, and I understand there's a lot of great whites. I thought, I'd like to know a lot more about sharks diving in Monterey, and there's a lot of things to know, and especially, Sean, when I got to speak with you, found out about the fact that the basking sharks used to be not only present, but prevalent in serious numbers. And I was pretty excited to have you come talk with us about that tonight. And anything else you'd like to throw in? Can you all see the Google Sheets here?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
See if I can large size that. All right.
Yeah.
Good job, Chris. You move quick.
All right. And I can flip through, just let me know when you're ready for different slides or the different video clips.
I'm ready when you guys are.
All right. I'm going to go to the breaching basking shark.
Wow.
Wow. I didn't know basking sharks breached.
Yeah, this a photo taken by Stefan O'Connor, a PSRF member residing in Ireland. This wasn't taken locally, but it does. It's I think the best breaching shot of a basking shark I've ever seen, and I think it helps demonstrate how underappreciated they are as an amazing bit of wildlife. Here off the Pacific coast of the U.S., Canada, Baja, they were, suffice it to say, once common to a point where they were declared a hazard to navigation and commerce, primarily fisheries, and indeed they were so abundant, counted in the hundreds of thousands even,
Wow.
during aerial surveys, going back to the 30s when they first started that up, and they were considered a nuisance. Some of you here in the Monterey Bay local area may be familiar with the sardine fishery, and that was a real boom, an eventual bust, but a lot of boats came from all over the place, as well as fired up here locally to go and fish for sardines. And these sharks were an encumbrance, an obstacle, a nuisance, because they get entangled in the nets. And as well, some of you may be familiar with molas, ocean sunfish here in Monterey Bay. We still have, good numbers of them, seasonally, periodically. And they can get quite large, world's largest bony fish. And we see them, over 1,000 pounds on occasion, usually quite a bit smaller. But there are times where you have to be careful navigating your boat because you'll hit them. They're just under the surface. They're not paying that close attention. And these basking sharks were similarly, like, they remind me of gigantic anchovies. You ever seen a school of anchovies, or been to the aquarium and seen their cool roundabout with the anchovies doing circles? They remind me of that. And they were once in that kind of density, hundreds and thousands of them. So they were opportunistically fished, both recreationally as well as commercially. Everything from fertilizer, it's a big cheap source of biomass that was distributed throughout the Salinas Valley as compost fertilizer. As well, the liver has always been valued since the beginning of the whaling days, for oil, and it can be mixed with whale oil and becomes a longer, slower burning source of lighting. And as well, in the 20th century, their livers had a high viscosity. It was used for aircraft lubrication, kind of in the waning days of piston aircraft, when the jets were still kind of new, and the piston engine aircraft other engines were being pushed further and further, higher RPMs, and this oil was the best quality. The fins have always been valued, and so they did fish them here in Monterey Bay. They also extirpated them, culled them out, shot them on site. Not everyone was fishing for them, and there was an apparent endless abundance of them. Up in Canada, same population moving up and down the coast and move all the way up to Canada, down to Baja, and then triangulate out in the open ocean. It's very similar to white shark movements in a lot of ways. And they were culled in Canada. Basically, there was such a wealth and abundance of higher paying, higher priced, more valued products up there that no one even wanted to bother with these basket sharks. And they were likewise at the same time, post World War II, a boom in fisheries, and everyone was coming home and getting to work, and they basically just eradicated them up there. The Department of Fisheries had an official campaign. They got at least 2 of their patrol boats with big sharpened railroad ties and metal blades. There are several versions of these used over time, and they were deliberately going out and cleaving them in 2, and they may have taken out several hundred in those first few seasons, in addition to the fisheries that we had here, including calling it in the Monterey Bay, the Lesser Morro Bay, and all the way down to Baja. So they are now very rare, and when they do appear, people get photos of them, video. Everyone's always excited about it because they're so rare, and they are kind of last thing you expect to see out there. That they are weird, they're massive, they're huge. But there's very little backstory in any of the news coverage, and oftentimes you'll see, even if like 10 or 15 of these animals are seen, it's often referred to as a comeback, a possible comeback, and without going into coming back from what, any context or perspective. So they are, in my estimation, the most endangered large shark in the Eastern Pacific. I don't know of another species of shark that is obviously as attrited and diminished in a former historic abundance as is the basking shark. And so I am always quick to point out they are not only just rare, they're one of the rarer things you can see, but they're the most endangered shark in the Eastern Pacific, all the way up to Canada. It's one big population that moved around. We get reports of them every year, but they're very scattered. Typically, a handful, typically one individual animal will be seen. A group of 3, group of 7 is big. A few years back, there was a group of approximately 15 that was reported, bus-sized sharks. It was in the news about how big and weird they were. But again, no context. It was described as possible comeback without any reference to from what, or their current environmental status. In Canada, they've come clean. It's obvious, and they've listed them as both an endangered and a protected species in the Pacific coast of Canada. In particular, Clayoquot Sound up in British Columbia was kind of center of the effort to get rid of them. There's a great book called Slaughter the Gentle Giants, British Columbia's Gentle Giants. I would definitely look that up. I sent a link to a brief summary by Tim Stevens. It's an excellent bit of work. It refers to both the sport harpoon fishery, as odd as that sound, as well as the commercial fishery. As well, my grandfather was involved in that fishery, and most of what I learned, I learned from him and his colleagues, the old timers, my mentors, and it didn't really sink in for a long time. I was in my 20s before I kind of woke up to it all. And this is a archive photo, 32 foot long, weighs 7 tons, 19,000 pounds. I don't know. Caught by Peter Bovich, something like Bovich of San Pablo, California. But look, that's a big old shark. And this is a photo going back into the 19th century. So they've always been around. They were taken concurrently, by the whalers as well, and were targeted by commercial fishermen in the 20th century, right in the 50s primarily, and just shot on sight. If you had a net boat and you're driving by and you see them, there's not a lot of talk about that. There were a number of recreational, fisheries established, kind of like a charter eventually. It was fairly popular where people would kind of, dress up in tennis clothing and go out and do a reenactment of these, kind of whaling hunts. That was a commercial glimpse of a commercial fisherman set up with a harpoon. And that's what they would do. They'd go out there, they'd harpoon them, fill them with air, time to barrels, that kind of thing, and go on and get a load of them, 3 sharks, and then would drag them in, dispatch them with the rifle, that kind of stuff. Bring them into Moss Landing. They had a whaling yard there. Whaling, as persisted up into the 70s, kind of waned here in the Eastern Pacific, prior to that. But there was a whaling station right here in Moss Landing, a good source of employment. My grandfather was fish and meat cutter here in Santa Cruz at the Mellis Market. It was like the Walmart of the time. There was just one big store here in Santa Cruz in the second half of the 40s. And he was fish cutter for 50 years. And that involved also early on going to Moss Landing and cleaning up both whales and basking sharks. And he also indulged in the shooting of them, was aware of the harpooning of them, and it was viewed as kind of an endless supply, right? No one really thought much about it. These animals may live easily over 100 years old. The oldest vertebrates on the planet appear to be sharks, Greenland sharks and other deep sea forms. The deeper you go, it seems like the older these things and the longer these things live. But suffice to say, these are big sharks. It takes a long time to grow. They grow quickly initially, and then there are records that are compelling of them in the 40-foot range. The world's second largest known shark, second only to the whale shark, which is commonly 30, 40 feet long, with records of them possibly being 60 feet long. I don't work with whale sharks. That's not my specialty. Want to talk too much about that, but right off of the coast of California here in Monterey Bay, we used to have huge numbers of basking sharks. They're not listed as a protected or endangered species in the U.S. Eastern Pacific West Coast. The fishery is closed. The fisheries, they were declared commercially extinct in the 50s. And in the year 2000, the fishery was officially closed. They're not abundant enough to support a dedicated fishery, but they are taken incidentally, opportunistically, outside the exclusion zones in Baja, and not to any heavy extent that I know of. I know worldwide there's a growing market for liver oil and squalene, and the basking shark is a primary source of that still to this day, because of their size and the massive liver and all those lipids and oils and stuff. And the fins as well are still highly valued. They are in fact the highest per price individual fins on the market. Those with the whale shark, white sharks, great hammerheads have a very large dorsal, and it's still sort of a prestige item. Used to be relegated to just nobility and wealthy people, but it became a fixture in the West Pacific. And we all know about shark finning, which is banned in California since 2012. The trade, possession of shark fins, etc. So that's all good. Basking sharks are protected by their low numbers. You know, the criteria for endangered species status is typically 10% of former abundances, and we're easily there. You have to be very optimistic or stubborn to kind of resist that sentiment, the overture, and need to get them listed as an endangered species outright, without even mincing the words. And you know, right now there's a lot of technicalities that are preventing that. And you know, there's a lot of talk about, oh, they might be coming back. You know, the 2017 sightings. I talked to whale watchers. You know, they talked about 15 sharks. Most people haven't seen them. Some of the experienced people knew that when you see a group of them, 5, 7, you'll see the tips of the dorsal fin and the dorsal, or you'll see the tip of the tail, the caudal, and the dorsal fin at the surface, and they're easily overcounted, right? And people will see, oh, there's one, and so they're overcounting. 15 would be a great number. You know, I've heard tales of as many as 50. No photos. People had cameras, got pictures of one, but I don't know. You know, those are unverified. There's more air traffic. There's more boating traffic. You know, skillful whale watchers that know what species are, not just up there is a whale of some sort. You know, they know what these animals are, and we don't see them. You know, the numbers have diminished steadily since the 90s, despite the increased numbers of NOAA overflights, private flights, charters, researchers, you know, looking for them. This is a photo of us tagging some of the first basking sharks ever tagged. It's a student at UCS at the time, Susan Arnold, second female to ever tag a basking shark. Elizabeth Trumpauer was the first visiting student out from New Jersey. So, you know, we have inadvertently, unconsciously introducing, you know, women to science, because we thought it would be good. You know, the folklore with basking sharks or with sharks in general, they're dangerous. You know, here the man gets through the tagging latch. You know, it's pretty easy, especially when they're feeding at the surface. They can be elusive at times, but otherwise they're very docile, indifferent animal. They get hit by, you know, big problems with vessel traffic. You know, the ferries that go back and forth across the Channel Islands. You know, there's believable reports of them hitting them. They don't get out of the way, and they get into mischief in that regard, tangling with fishing gear, all that stuff. So there's a lot of concern for them, and you know, I hope to generate some interest, if not concern, and curiosity with these animals in particular. To me, they should be the flagship species for all the nonprofit shark organizations, clubs. You know, I tease them, razz them, you know, oh, these, you know, shark fans, you know, they love sharks, you know, dead or alive. You know, if you ask people, you know, the people catching and releasing them, killing a lot of them, everyone loves sharks. You know, the sport divers, you know, do a lot of good, bringing people out and educating them, showing them these sharks. They're magnificent, white sharks, that is. Basking sharks when possible. You know, but cage diving, you know, there's flaws with feeding and teasing and causing, you know, cage diving accidents and stuff. And you know, it's not a popularity contest with me. I don't care what people think. I'll speak my mind full circle to all the shark enthusiasts, and I often tease them. You guys love sharks, dead or alive. You don't really care. Pay attention, you know.
Well, and to that point about the live sharks and what to do if you saw one, if we don't cover it during your presentation tonight in the write-up in the newsletter, I'll put the stuff that you gave me on who to call if you see a basking shark, where to look for the tags, because that's pretty interesting. Between all of us and the people we know, that's a lot of time on the water. And eventually, you're probably one of us is going to see one, and you want to record that number, get in touch with some folks, let them know it's there.
Hopefully, yeah, definitely, and bring up any good questions like that. Ask me anything. So should you see a basking shark, you got your cameras going, try to get a good lateral view of the dorsal fin. See if there are any transmitters on there, tags. We've tagged a record number of 83 of them, including, amongst those, the very first satellite transmitter attached in Monterey Bay. That was a concurrent effort with NOAA scientists, Owen Snodgrass, and some others working in the Channel Islands as well. We published a paper in 2018, almost 10 years in the making, but you can look that up. Movements of northeastern Pacific basking sharks. Very technical, kind of dry, not much talk about conservation status, etc. But it's a very good paper. And on that paper, the lead author, Heidi Duar at NOAA, is a good principal contact, right? It's all burning under her desk, and she's a good scientist. So contact NOAA. Moss Landing Marine Lab has a shark lab. Long Beach has a shark lab. Since the paper came out in 2018, I don't know a lab that's not interested. Some are better poised than others to go and, hopefully attach another transmitter. There's some others since 2018 paper came out that have been attached down in Southern California. And this is gold, right? Not only to the publish or perish dynamic, but, to environmental studies. It's not all just fisheries biology, right? And, we've got to conserve fisheries. I come from a fishery background. I'm involved in fisheries right now. So it's not a contest, but the more environmental studies perspective we can get into it, into the equation, the better. I think that's sort of a natural progression. Definitely contact us, the Pelagic Shark Research Foundation here in Monterey Bay. We have one transmitter that we're hoping to put out this year before we have to return it for a battery swap. And again, it's the most endangered large shark in the Eastern Pacific. It's vital that we get these data to, prove range, which I think we have figured out at this point. Get higher definition data. If you encounter a basking shark, in addition to the lateral view photos, document everything you can. Hopefully you got good visibility. If you got a GoPro, put it underwater, see if it's a male or female. If you're in a group, see if it's all females, all males, possibly a mating pair. No one's ever seen a mate or give birth. So much of their natural behavior is unknown. They're not a whale. They don't have to come up and respirate. And they're not always at the surface. In fact, they're very deep divers. That's one of the plausible deniabilities is that, these sharks, maybe they surface every 2 decades. And, that's not reflected in what records we do have, which is mostly from fisheries. But it is quite possible that they are somewhere out between here and Hawaii in great abundances. And no one, military, Coast Guard, National Fisheries Service, or NASA has been able to locate them in any abundances. There's been a nice paper published recently about their apparent decline in sightings, despite the flyering and posters and people being on the lookout for them. They're just not getting seen as much. We had a very large congregation of basking sharks back in the early 90s where we tagged the bulk of our tags were deployed during that period. There was a previous gathering that I saw that Howard Hall videographed in the middle of the 70s, same time frame as the movie Jaws came out. He did a really good job. Some of the earliest, underwater in color footage from the Eastern Pacific. You can look that up. I looked on YouTube, you couldn't find it. This is a photo from Capitola Wharf, and it is a single night's catch from a set net, a few hundred meters long, a few hundred yards long, set back in the back of the bay. And it included there is an approximately 9 to 10 foot long white shark. We have had increased sightings of white sharks since 2015. Mind you, these are all pups. The place has been famous for large sharks, including white sharks, since the whaling days, right? Quite probably before then. And during over 30 years of aerial surveys, we always see sharks uh, with a consistent enough basis to actually do sky tours out of Watsonville. Specialized Helicopters does this. If you're interested in going out and whale watching from the 1,000 feet up, it's a very panoramic, scenic situation, cinematic, and we'd always see a few white sharks, usually in the 10 to 13-foot range. And then abruptly in 2015, we would see dozens of them. And these were yearlings, 5.5 feet to 8, 9 feet long. A different generational category than we used to see here. So there are fluctuations over time. I don't see this as a white shark population increase so much as a change of their range, right? There's a reciprocal absence, less abundance in the former south end of the range in Baja. You still find them in northern Baja, Southern California, San Diego, and they've steadily moved north since the late 90s, really. And then they kind of settled off Malibu and would very, very rarely come north of, Ventura, and Point Conception was kind of the breakoff point. And then 2013, 14, things started to change. We had record numbers of blue whale sightings, bluefin tuna being caught in Monterey Bay, and some other things. None of it unheard of, but in record abundances. So it doesn't mean the population of blue whales is increasing, or killer whales, which we've seen an increased abundance of regularity of sightings in Monterey Bay, including some, outgroups that weren't formerly seen here. It doesn't mean they weren't here, but they hadn't been documented up until relatively recently. And then on the heels of this, we had these juvenile white sharks moving into Monterey Bay and setting up, kind of an aggregation point in the Soquel Cove. If you go to Google Earth, you'll find Soquel Cove. It's right off of New Brighton and Sequoia State Beach, kind of wedged in there between Capitola and Aptos. And the sharks are there in such regularity that there are tours now, shark park tours. And so these are, again, vintage photos. That's me in 1991, kind of an awkward photo, trying to tag this basking shark. The previous photos were from the fishery back days. You can see how the methods and focus have changed. That's Al Thevenin, famous local fisherman and mariner here, who also participated in the fishery for basking sharks. And in this case, this animal's harpooned and he's dispatching it, putting it out with the help of a rifle. And by the second half of the 50s, the problem with their abundance was solved. So first you harpoon it, and then you shoot it with a rifle, and then you fill it with air, and then tow it, or actually leave it moored with a flag on it, and then come back and get it on the way back in. So if these things ever did come back, would be a real boom for whale watching as well, right? They're worth more alive than they are dead, but the numbers are so low that it's a real concern for me. I'm convinced they're on the way out. And so fisheries are closed for them, but they're not officially listed as endangered, which I think is necessary to basically, lift them up out of obscurity and put them in context, right? It's not just big, weird, and rare, all right? This is an animal that used to be so abundant that they were declared a nuisance and wiped out on purpose. And if they are to make a comeback, then we do need to dignify the fact that they are an endangered species and declare them protected. Right now, they're just sort of, roped off, taped off, no. And the sad part is the Americans and Canadian fisheries are the only ones, in my estimation, that are at least pretending to play by the rules. They're actually all pretty law-abiding, and increasingly so over time. As the rules have, contracted around the various fisheries, gill nets are gone, etc. There's been a culling process among the SCAF laws in commercial fisheries. So the U.S. and Canadians are probably the best in the world, right? I don't just say that, but in part the rules are there. when someone blows it, it blows it for everybody, right? When a crabber entangles a whale, they all feel it. And, you know, need to be checking balances. To that, I'm concerned with, you know, sport crabbing, right? All my friends are going to, you know, kill me, throw bottles at me. But that's just the fact, right? You got, they don't tend their gear as well, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, my example is that, you know, with increasing pressure, you know, there's interactions in among the fisheries that sort of handle that, as well as fines and stuff like that. So the real earnest interest in playing by the rules and making it work. And I think you'll really, you know, I wouldn't say only find that, but you best find that in U.S. and Canadian fisheries. So I find that, you know, encouraging. Baja, Mexico is also improving greatly. They got more scientists in the game now, and with education, public education, you know, I think there is an increased awareness and conscientiousness regarding this stuff. You know, even when everything's so difficult, you know, complications just, you know, with everybody's day-to-day stuff. This stuff still counts. This stuff still matters. Here you see another, you know, commercial fishery. They're just going to suck out the liver. You know, they introduced like a big vacuum in there, and you know, shark liver, all livers, they're pretty, it's like the consistency of Jello, right? So they'll just suck that up, put it in the hole, keep it cold, and that's been documented off the Eastern Pacific. This is me. This is the tools of the trade, which have changed, right? Now I use GoPro, and others are also pursuing that. It's different, you know. I often say it to hunters, you know, and big game fishermen. It's harder to get good photos, you know, and video than it is to go out and kill something. You know, these animals, you know, take decades to reach maturity and you know, fulfill their lifespans. And people, you know, sport fishermen, I always, you know, kind of scold. You know, they go out and you know, deliberately, you know, trophy fishing will kill you know, an animal that's, you know, 30, 40 years old in the course of a morning while cracking beers, you know, for sport, for fun, their day off. And then there's a lot of, you know, sport catch and release, you know, which I find irritating because you'll hear the, you know, the platitudes, oh, everything I catch is, you know, released unharmed. It's like, no, you just fed it a big barbed hook. Okay. At best, it has jaw injuries. And, you know, if they swallow the hook, things toast. You know, they don't recover. And even when they swim off, you know, apparently in good order, you know, there's secondary infections and complications that can reduce their lifestyle or, you know, life duration, you know, hamper their abilities to cope, right, with the environment, you know, their prey and or, you know, predators, you know, rivals and that kind of stuff. So it all matters. And, you know, I, for one, don't kill anything I don't intend to eat. And I don't go around hooking fish or sharks for no other reason that it would, you know, amuse my peers, you know, or make me feel better. It just doesn't. And there's time and place for everything. So with bass and sharks, they're so rare that they're in some ways protected. But at the same time, the overlying situation and, you know, situational awareness is important for the public to realize that these things are endangered and why they are endangered. You know, I hope they are coming back. I don't see any evidence of a comeback.
You were on the front lines of getting the white shark protected. So if we use that as kind of a case example, and we fast forward to today, what would it look like to get a species protected? Like what can people in community like us do? Obviously, we have a big stake in the health of the you know, aquatic species and all that stuff. We're interested. We're active. Like, take us back to the white shark protection. What did you have to do to get people worked up and involved?
You know, the game has changed so much. When we came in, it was kind of, you know, we I think came from a direction they just didn't see us coming. You know, most of the discussions were among students, you know, the professors, and then their agencies, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Fish and Game at the time, and National Fisheries Service. I had worked with all of them, and so I did have sort of a network of knowing people, and I think that helped. I knew Dave Holtz, and argued with Greg Caillet, and who was a brilliant guy. I learned so much from all these people. But I came as a commercial fisherman, right? I was an anthropology major, paleontology major. There's just, it's not, there's just not a lot going on in the U.S. For that, archaeology, that kind of stuff, right? But so I was in school, I had this commercial fishing and sport, charter boat experience. I saw my first white shark when I was a preteen, growing up in the mid 70s during the Jaws movie. I'd read the book and all this. So I was kind of saturated and freaked out about sharks. They're the best things. Like, we don't have dinosaurs, you need them, we got sharks, including these big giant basking sharks. So I approached it with a youthful enthusiasm, and just, it was easier. Everything's, defense in depth now. Everybody knows me, and they're pointed in my direction. A lot of the times, especially on issues like basking sharks, right? So I'll keep applying pressure. There need to be more discussion, more exhibits in aquariums. It's a flagship issue. It needs to not be obscure. What's different now is things are just a lot stricter, right? In terms of media access, right? I was on CNN and all this stuff, back in the early days. CNN was a different animal at that point too.
The 24-hour news channel, now they're all 24.
Yeah, enough on that. But there are fewer news stations. It was much more consolidated. I think the reporters had more leeway to investigate types of things. Now everything goes through a vetting process. And, as well, with so much going on socially and politically, I think sharks wouldn't now, and doesn't hold as much instant interest, right? Those reports were relatively rare back then, relegated to shark attacks and stuff like that. And,
you say that, but I actually heard a professor say a couple of weeks ago that the students really respond to the opportunity to work on something green. So, they've been hearing all the bad news, and they want to do something. They want to put their energy behind something.
Yeah,
environmental studies. They want to participate.
Other lobe of the brain that's thinking about this.
That's right.
And that'll be that. I think that'll be the inevitable, win. I don't know how to get them protected. I've been trying for 30 years. When we got white sharks protected, I was the original sponsor of that. I had a conversation with Assemblyman Dan Hauser of Arcata, California at that time, and Pete Wilson, of all people, who was the governor. And he put me in contact with some people talking about white shark protection. PSRF, we formed in 1990. I was the original sponsor of that. And then it attracted interest. There were meetings. We had meetings here in Santa Cruz where Dr. Pete Clinley came and spoke. John McCosker came to the Loudon Nelson Center and spoke. And, I was able to, lend my voice to that. And the scenario at the time was like, this is the next big Mako, white sharks. We got people coming and contacting me because I was listed this whole time as a fishery consultant. Now I'm a marine wildlife consultant. People from Australia, South Africa, East Coast of the U.S., primarily, who are like, hey, I want to, can you get me on a big white shark? I hear you're up there studying them, and on Nuevo Island. We established that site in 1992, and really didn't gain any momentum until 94, 95, 96. And then I started working as UCSC staff, which helped amplify my voice. Who is he? We have no idea. Who that is.
He's at the university.
UCSC staff. They would refer to me as not professor ever, but a scientist, and working with You see, and I got, yeah, I'm a a wildlife consultant, fishery consultant, and my specialty is sharks. There weren't a lot of shark researchers out there at the time. There were a couple of very big names with, relative to everyone else, had a lot of experience. John McCosker, David Ainley, Scott Anderson, who is a real pioneer in terms of studying white sharks. We based our project largely after the project that was established by Scott Anderson, Pete Pyle out of Fairlawns, using surfboards as lures.
Mhm.
And looking at that, we were just out there in the wind, waiting for predation events, which are few and far between.
Sure.
And you can only be in there, several hours of the day. It was labor intensive. And then we started, well, let's use not a surfboard, because you can see surfers from where we're working. We used a plywood cutout, thin sheet plywood, shape of a seal, yellow side on the top. That's so our primate eyes can see it, and kind of brownish gray on the underside. So basically, I just put out the word. Look, there's people coming, mostly Southern California, and in Monterey Bay. They want to catch a big white shark, get a big giant set of jaws, and
Yeah.
there's the populations have been reduced in both Australia and South Africa, at this time. All these places were well known for sharks, but as it appeared at that time, California had perhaps the most intact population of white sharks. They were killed a lot during the whaling days. They would come up with
Sure.
whaling boats, and guys would zoom in with the blubber spade and shoot them. And so there's a
Fair
tradition
enough.
there. The East Coast had, Frank Mundus, the monster man out there fishing for him, and same kind of thing. If you saw a big shark, you try to catch it, kill it. People weren't into
Sure.
photography back then. So
Well, I know that there's hours of stories in this stuff, and man, we could go on the white shark, the film industry, the television industry, but bringing it back to basking sharks. Do you mind if I open the floor for some questions?
no, please do.
All right. Any questions, thoughts for Sean? Any snapshots you want to go back to?
Well, so I'm just curious. So I know we've been talking about basking sharks most of the time, but I know you're associated with the Pelagic Shark Research Foundation. Do they also support activities related to preservation of basking sharks and other sharks, or specifically pelagic sharks?
All the above. We also have a stranding rescue unit we established in the early 90s, kind of the first of its kind. And we've been involved with leopard sharks, bat ray mass strandings, and that kind of thing, trying to characterize them and raise public awareness when these things were happening. And research is the main component, the means to get where we're going. I think that's what the difference was when we started out. I was already doing research at the time we started getting a voice, and it just worked, back then. It wasn't as cluttered. There were fewer, qualified experts with any experience. And so, that's changed, as people have taken interest, like you say, and, made effort to, go to college and learn about them, get a job perhaps, but most of it was fisheries biology, as a degree. And that's changing because there's a lot of room out there for environmental studies. And so our approach has always been research, but from that environmentalist perspective, right? When we started out in 1990, there were groups like Earth First, and of course there's Greenpeace, which has evolved quite a bit. And so, we're old school. Our mission statement is the same as it was in 1990. So we work with pelagics, makos, blue sharks, white, all the lamnids, as well as tidal estuarine sharks, rays, and skates. California's tidal marine estuaries are reduced by, to 10% of their former abundances. They're now sloughs. They double as storm drain basins. A lot of the like in San Francisco Bay Area, there's been so much backfill and development there. Oracle Pond, and Redwood City have these nice, very nice urban suburban waterways. That double as stormwater basins. They're controlled with tide gates. I remember when sea level rise was a debate, and now it's no longer a debate. And a lot of that infrastructure is really hard pressed, and has been slowly upgraded and kind of refitted, etc. But there are still problems with tide gates having to be closed during low tide cycles, especially during the spring when you have those flood tides. And you get large numbers of sharks and rays trapped inside these inland lagoons. The water quality diminishes, the oxygen goes down, the temperature goes up. And if there's heavy rain, the salinity plummets, and or with evaporation, it gets hypersaline, and the sharks will die. You've got like 4 or 5 days. It's like trying to keep a home aquarium, how complicated that can be. So these sharks will die by the dozens, as many as 100 we've documented in Berkeley Aquatic Pond in 2016. Then the tide gates get open, it flushes all that into the nearshore Bay Trail areas, and then through that accumulation and deposition of rotted carcass, you have is epizootic plumes of copepods or in nematodes, protozoas, bacterial and stuff like that will kill even a free swimming shark, and that's a problem. So water quality, spills, all these issues, when we get hundreds of sharks washing up. 2017 was a follow-up to the 2016 event, which got no press coverage. 2017 was a huge event. We published numerous papers resulting from that work. There's a carnobacterial infection that seems to be killing lamniform sharks like makos, salmon sharks, and thresher sharks, and increasingly so. We don't know why exactly yet. Usually carnobacteria are benign. For whatever reason, they're getting, they're necrotizing nervous systems and brains in certain species of sharks. And at least the one ray that was collected by one of our volunteers in Alameda, a torpedo ray, an electric ray. So, not to digress too far, but there's a lot of research and issues. It's not relegated to just pelagic sharks. In 1990, when we established, the main focus was on the lamnids, the blue sharks, which there's a growing concern for. They used to be ubiquitous, very abundant, and they've been filtered out by the open ocean gill net fisheries and the mechanized longline gear fisheries out in the open ocean, clear across to the West Pacific. It's one big migration, kind of a procession. We proved that in the mid 2000s with one of our tagged blue sharks being recovered less than 600 miles away from Japan. We've had others collected, not returned. What was good is this was found by a biologist that was very diligent, contacted California Department of Fish and Wildlife to notify me that they had recovered their tag. And prior to that, it was a debate. Oh, we have an Eastern Pacific or blue shark population, West Pacific, and whatever. It's one big procession that goes around. It might take 3 years to come back around. But these sharks are getting caught and collected. Oceanic white tips, makos, salmon sharks, in netting and longline fisheries. And so, we were very much involved with pelagic specific type stuff. Because of, at that time, I could see on the horizon this emerging mechanized modern longlines, mechanized monofilament drift gill nets, and the finning fishery. This is before it really splashed, but I could see it coming, and I was telling people, watch out. And so we got busy tagging sharks here, mostly in Monterey Bay, for that. Also, Actions as an environmental group, there was a long-standing tradition, an event in Moss Landing in the Elkhorn Tidal Marine Estuary, so-called Elkhorn Slough, where leopard sharks and bat rays were seen as a hazard to commerce and fisheries, and they established rod and gun clubs, oyster interests, established archery contests. It was actually initiated. They used dynamite and shotguns and pitchforks in the early on days. They're just trying to get rid of all these sharks that they presumed were eating their, shellfish harvests. And eventually, they found it became popular to shoot them with bows and arrows. And up until 1996, from the second half of the 40s up until 1996, there was a ongoing shark killing contest in the Elkhorn tidal marine estuary. And
So we can do
direct
a lot of good locally. Whoops, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Repeat that.
I was just going to say, there's a lot that we can do locally to learn about what we were doing just a few decades ago, and then extending that to more protections.
Hard, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I collect it all, and I've got it all memorized. And I can talk your ears off about all this type of stuff. We could do a series.
Yeah, we could.
One, is an hour-long presentation easily, and I would very much enjoy doing that. But to answer the question in a more direct way, yeah, we're involved in environmental actions, protests. It's been many years since we actually did anything like that. I guess the most recent one was shark chumming right here in Monterey Bay. Right, we established a project up at Oniwebu Island, and we had dive boats and private boaters going up there to do the same thing, basically. And I think we kind of inspired some of it by our neat photos and me talking about it so much. And sadly, the contention was like, well, don't feed the sharks. You're making them pissed off. And long story short, my contention was that, natural behavior is like you bait them, they'll swim around circles in the boat, and you can look at them that way. But, for some, that's not interesting enough, and they would prefer to evoke a violent response from the shark. More in keeping with the stereotypical behavior of what a great white shark was supposed to be, right? Because they would come up the boat in a circle, and so we took issue with that. They were very repelled by my commentary. They wanted to feed the sharks. They weren't hurting them. And to me, it was like, well, this is one of the most basic tenets of wildlife here is don't feed the sharks. I've tagged over 164 sharks. I haven't had to feed any of them. I haven't had to hook any of them.
Yep.
They're not hard to work with. And so, that was on CNN. And then that resulted in the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary establishing actually a no cage diving for white sharks, in addition to no, feeding them or chumming them, pursuing them in that way, which is good. But, there could have been, room for tours that don't involve feeding of the sharks. There are tours now in Monterey Bay, out of Santa Cruz Whale Watching, for example, who I work with. There's some others out of Moss Landing as well. We'll go up to Oniwebu Island, to so-called Shark Park, as I mentioned, just east of Capitola, and right out in front of Aptos, where the sharks gather. Tour boats go through there on a fairly regular basis and see sharks almost every time. It's so early in the year. Come July, August, the sharks you'll see a dozen, several to a dozen every trip. And there's naturalists on board that will educate you. There's no cages getting, banged into or anything real violent, but there is a shark.
It sounds like a heck of an opportunity, and the fact that it's home right in our own neck of the woods is pretty amazing. Well, Sean,
I was living in Capitola when they showed up in 2015. I'd been doing aerial tours.
Yeah.
There's helicopters for about a decade leading up to that. It was really obvious when they showed up, the smaller sizes and in those, increased numbers. And so, right in my backyard, And so then I was torn between, I need to be on the boat. I need to be there.
Yeah, that's right.
And with drones, that has greatly reduced, cost,
Yep.
and efficiency. And we have
Well-
opportunities for volunteers, drone pilots. I think these sharks are diveable, provided that it's not, Adventure Man sports drama, right? If you want to photograph wildlife, there's whales, there's dolphins. The visibility isn't typically very good. If you get 10,
Yeah.
20 feet, you're lucky. But it's a great site. I'm trying to promote it. I don't want it to become a hot spot for fishing. We've had 3 white sharks wash up dead in Monterey Bay since 2017. There's problems with speeding boats. People get excited. They'll see a shark 100 yards away, speed over to it, not seeing the 2 or 3 in the, in between there and hit one. So lifeguards are on the ball. There's swim float buoys to keep the boats and the swimmers separated. And people kayak out there, stand up paddle. You get kids with their inner tubes, paddle. It makes me nervous. It makes the lifeguards alert. And so far so good. Nothing happened in Shark Park. We did have a fatal attack on a knee board in 2020.
Yeah.
I think
Hopefully you're going to see some of these Monterey Bay sea otters come out and join you for a cruise. Sharks.
absolutely.
Go out and learn more about them.
Chris
Yeah.
has all my contact information. If it's not available right there, I shared a link with Tim Thomas's summary on basking sharks. I hope you guys can read that.
I will write it all up,
Well,
and
a
especially
video-
the stuff about what to do if you see
Yeah,
any kind of shark, especially back.
reported to Heidi Duar.
All right.
with, National Marine Fisheries Service, NOAA. She's our best bet. To tell her bosses, right?
Absolutely.
The more interest we can inspire with the research, the better that is. Contact your nearest lab.
Yep.
Basically. If you're in Southern California, where the majority of the sightings are still taking place, a lot more boat traffic down there.
I should make a little boat placard that says, in case of shark sighting, do these things. So Sean, thank you very much. I give you a round of applause for all of that and
Thank you.
for being out there doing this stuff.